Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Policy Memo Competition panel during Inclusive Excellence Week here at the Elliott School. I hope if we have attendees in the audience that you all have also been attending our other events this week. Special thanks to Carice Bates, who is our new DEI coordinator at the Elliott School, who was absolutely instrumental in putting all these together. So today we have a really exciting panel. We have 3 undergraduate students here at the Elliott School who contributed policy memos towards advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, both here at the Elliott School and in our curricula. And so the prompt for the memo was really asking the students to think about how, if any gaps there are in our curriculum, either through the omission of various authors or the omission of various topics, if that at all has created any sort of bias, it has left out, different perspectives, different ideas, et cetera, et cetera. So our 3 winning submissions are from Anthony Hugh, from Laura Narcisse, and from Jiner Fan. And so we will actually ask them to speak a little bit on their policy memos for about 10 to 15 minutes each before we open it up for Q&A. Anthony's memo was on non-English scholarships in international affairs. Laura's memo deals with integrating anthropology into the study of international affairs. And Jiner Fan's policy memo deals with bringing more attention to gender-based violence in our curriculum. So we will ask them to present just in the order as I've introduced them. So Anthony, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you. I'm very excited to be here. As Laila mentioned, my policy memo was on incorporating and including more non-English literature into our curricula and our research as well. Two reasons why I think this is really important is first because when we don't incorporate literature outside of the English realm, we lose out on opportunities for more timely and more innovative research. I came across this tweet from this international human rights scholar, and he was talking about how one of his colleagues had just published a research article on a topic that had actually been written by a French author nearly 14 years ago. And so the implication here is that, when we are able to incorporate and consider literature and scholarship that has been conducted outside of English, we have more opportunities to create more innovative ideas and do so in a more timely manner. But the second reason, and more importantly, why it's important to consider this non-English scholarship and literature, which can include, any language in the world and all the literature that is produced around the world, is because when we don't do so and we only focus on English language perspectives from the Western world and from English-speaking countries, that directly leads to more biased policies in the international community, but also more biased perspectives, they're like intentionally or unintentionally. There was another, this quote or this comment that really struck me from this editor of this international law journal. He was saying how Western writers, authors from Western countries tend to speak as if they were revolutionizing the field, but authors and writers from peripheral countries write as if they were asking for permission to speak. And this really struck me, and that kind of stayed with me for many years, mainly because, I feel like if we don't consider literature that has been already published, right, especially at the Elliott School, when we're talking about all these conflicts and issues that are happening around the world and outside of our countries and in our native homes, it's super important. It's most important to consider the perspectives and inputs and solutions and ideas from those people who are actually living those conflicts or who have backgrounds in those conflicts. And so that's why it's incredibly important, to consider and to incorporate these native perspectives into our literature and our learning. And so the 3 solutions and 3 recommendations I had for this kind of go hand in hand, and I think can be easily implemented at the Elliott School, but I think will also have a really big impact on our students and our learning. The first is targeted toward the entire Elliott School population, including undergraduates and graduate students. But if we can create more guidance and encourage faculty members to include more non-English scholarship into their syllabi and into their teaching, and this can include translated articles or translated media, or it could include works written in English by these authors who are native to these issues. That would allow for more inclusive and more diverse perspectives in our learning, kind of open our worldview beyond what we've already learned and what we're exposed to commonly in the US. And this has been done by a lot of professors already, but if we can do this on a more systematic level throughout the Elliott School and in each of these different fields and each of the different concentrations, I think that would be really beneficial for all Elliott students. And then the second and third recommendation kind of go hand in hand, and this is targeted more towards students who are conducting their own research and getting into independent studies and theses and stuff like that. But in our research methods classes, recommendation 2 is to incorporate a portion and to teach students how to access translated materials or how to navigate and find authors who are native to issues that we want to write about and that we're studying. And so I don't believe currently that it's commonly taught. I remember I was only exposed to this idea of trying to find translated works or works that are written in other languages because a librarian had came to speak to us and had mentioned in passing that that's something that we can actually do, and we can look up translated terms to identify works that have been written in other languages but are translated through the library databases. And those serve as really great primary sources, but also secondary sources in terms of ideas and knowledge. And so if we can incorporate that more systematically throughout all our research methods classes, especially at the Elliott School where it's incredibly relevant, that would be the second recommendation. But recommendation 2 and 3 go hand in hand. And so to complement that, for students that may already have taken research methods classes or have taken other types of research methods classes such as statistics or geography and cartography, creating a research guide for those students to navigate these resources on their own, teaching basically the same thing, but just having that resource online, in addition to the number of research guides that we have already at the Gelman Library. That would go hand in hand with recommendation 2, and both of which, 2 and 3, would help students doing their own research at the undergraduate level and the graduate level to incorporate more of these voices and ideas and solutions into their research and learning. And so these were the 3 recommendations I posed in my policy memo. I really think that it would make a difference in students. I know it definitely helped me, see issues in different ways that might not have been comfortable for me, but also really important in understanding some of the conflicts going on abroad. And that's it for me. I look forward to any questions or stuff like that.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I think that was a really great explanation and presentation on your ideas and on your policy memo. I will ask if we could hold questions till the end of the session. So instead, I think I would like to invite Laura Narcisse to present on her policy.
Thank you so much, Laila. So as you mentioned at the beginning, the title of my policy memo is Integrating Anthropology into the Study of International Affairs. So I am an international affairs major, but I'm also double majoring in anthropology. And usually when I tell people that I'm double majoring in anthropology, their first question is, what is that? And do I want to be like a scientist or an archaeologist? But the reason why I decided to double major in anthropology is that I needed to fulfill a prerequisite for the Elliott School. And so I decided to take linguistic anthropology. And I'm really fond of foreign languages. I currently speak 4 languages. So that was something that seemed like a clear next step for me. But taking linguistic anthropology really opened my eyes to what I was missing in the Elliott School and in the curriculum in international affairs. Specifically, when I say that, it's that the Elliott School and international affairs on its own does not really provide students with a holistic understanding of human diversity and how diversity influences concepts such as statehood, power, and identity that are pretty crucial in our curriculum. And human level analysis is usually not a prominent feature in international affairs, despite the recent efforts made by the Elliott School to diversify our curriculum. And so my policy memo really just talks about how anthropology is a really clear and a specific response to that issue that's missing in the international affairs curriculum and study. And further and more specific integration of anthropology would be a critical bridge in the gap that is the theoretical and consequential concepts that come in international affairs. So one of the examples that I was thinking about when I was writing my policy memo of what's a good example of what I think is missing from international affairs. So in my freshman year, I took Intro to IA like many other freshmen, and we learned a lot about just some of the theories in international affairs. So realism, liberalism, constructivism, as well as some others. And when we were learning about realism, I found that there was something missing in the way that we were taught about how, in a realist point of view, war is just an extension of politics and it's inevitable. It's just something that happens, an extension of politics. And I thought that there was something missing in the sense that we didn't talk about the human consequences of war. We didn't talk about the fact that women and children are disproportionately affected in wartime and violent conflict. We didn't really talk about the propaganda and the agendas that go into influencing our support of war. And so I decided to take sociocultural anthropology after fulfilling my anthropology requirement for the Elliott School. And during my time taking sociocultural anthropology, I read this book by Laila Abu Lagod. I might be butchering that, but her book was titled "Do Muslim Women Need Saving?" And the context of the book was about American support for the Iraq War and how the Bush administration had really centered this whole propaganda around Muslim women needing saving from Islamic extremism. And although it was very noble to want to save women or just save people who are undergoing crises, it was a very ethnocentric approach, and ethnocentrism is an anthropological term for when you, as an American, see your ethnicity and your way of life as being the only right way of life and the only right approach to society. And so that was something that I really saw a lot, not only in the curriculum, but also in my peers as well. Studying, for example, the Iraq War again, and listening to different perspectives and very diverse perspectives. They weren't always aligned with the human level of analysis. They were much broader. And that's just something that comes with studying international affairs. We focus on a system and state level analysis. But that is why I proposed in my policy memos integrating anthropology into the curriculum, because I think it can really bridge that gap between human level and state system level, but also expose students to a book like Do Muslim Women Need Saving? My regional concentration is not Middle East, but I found it to be amazingly eye-opening on how even I can look at a different region like Latin America or Africa that I'm specifically interested in, and seeing that sometimes I do have biases on using language that is framed to save other people when we really shouldn't frame our language that way. And so in my policy memo, I proposed 3 different policies that I think the Elliott School could really effectively implement, given that we do have a robust anthropology department. And so the first policy that I proposed is that we could incorporate anthropological topics and scholarship into our current curriculum. So in Intro to IA that all Elliott School students have to take, having a work like Laila Abulagud's Do Muslim Women Need Saving, that would be an excellent introduction to cultural and religious biases that have grave political consequences that people usually just don't think about. And also introducing the concepts of ethnocentrism, like I mentioned, and also cultural relativism, which is another anthropological concept that, similar to ethnocentrism, you kind of see your way of viewing the world as the right way, but you also use your way of seeing the world and always compare it to another system. So in my economics class, when we talk about America's capitalist economy, and we always compare it to China's communist economy, we are always looking at it from that point of view of comparing instead of just objectively viewing and understanding. So something like that, those two concepts are something that could definitely be integrated into the Elliott School's curriculum, but also in other concepts that I'm sorry, I got a private message and that totally distracted me. But yeah, it could also go into economics and other fields that international affairs students also have to take as well. So the second proposal was that we could develop a political anthropology subfield within the anthropology department. As an anthropology double major, I think the anthropology department is amazing, but it kind of restricts international affairs students in the sense that you would either have to take linguistic anthropology or sociocultural anthropology, and many students just frankly might not be interested in that. But having a political anthropology subfield that specifically tackles issues such as state and stateless societies, it addresses anthropological concepts like positionality and reflexivity, which are very similar to ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. And political anthropology it's really an extension of international affairs in a way. And there were a few potential courses that I was thinking about when writing this policy memo. So for instance, like in a course about the anthropology of foreign aid. So thinking about the human effects of foreign aid, or the anthropology of humanitarian intervention, the anthropology of peace building. These are concepts that we already learn in international affairs curriculum, but we don't really learn about the human effects of them, and we don't analyze them on a human level. And the third policy that I thought up was that the Elliott School should require an introductory political anthropology course for first year and transfer students once we develop a political anthropology subfield. And the reason why I think that's very important to do in a student's first year or once they transfer to the school is because anthropology and anthropological concepts, although very complex, are a great foundation to understanding so much about the world. Taking anthropology classes has really opened my eyes to how diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts fail. And oftentimes they just fail because we still have these intrinsic biases. We still are ethnocentric in our approach to the world and our approach to academia. And so having that basis during a student's first year at the Elliott School will really help the Elliott School instill diversity, equity, inclusion in their students, but also in the culture of the Elliott School as a whole. So even though the international affairs and anthropology are two distinct fields, I definitely think that they can be bridged and used together to augment the efforts that have already been made by the Elliott School. And they can really provide a holistic approach and a holistic view of how international affairs concepts of statehood and power, diplomacy, how those all have very, very real human consequences. So yeah, that was my policy memo.
Thank you so much, Laura. I myself am a political scientist, but I've learned so much from anthropologists since my time here at the Elliott School. And I've actually just recently published in an anthropology journal called Practicing Anthropology. So I am definitely practicing what are some of the recommendations in your memo. So that's great. And last but not least, we have Jiner Fan, who is going to be discussing her memo on bringing more attention to gender-based violence in our curriculum. Jiner, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leah. And I want to thank you for, my fellow panelists. I feel like everyone really set a good foundation. We totally didn't plan this, but it works really nicely. I feel like it's a good transition to my topic, which is bring more attention to gender focused issues or gender-based violence in our current curriculums, especially towards peace talks or security policies or IA in general. And I just want to sort of introduce, go into a little bit background of my background on gender issues and in IA. So as a freshman, like everyone else, step into international affairs, there are a lot of issues we kind of surround ourselves with. But it's really until for my sophomore year, the second semester in my class, which we talk about I chose for essentially for my security policy concentration class, is called Gender, Policy, and Security. And that was the first time ever I was really exposed to sort of how the gender aspects and how in conflicts, in violences, there are so many sort of misconduct or specific actions towards targeting specific groups because based on their gender. And that was really shocking to learn. That actually is one of the really major factors in a lot of ongoing conflicts in the world right now. And it makes a lot of sense too, because you can't really exclude half of the population out of security talks, out of peace talks, out of negotiation, conflict prevention, and trying to sustain and trying to formulate a better way going forward out of the conflicts. So it just being a big issue, super endearing to my heart. Ever since then, I realized I don't know a lot about gender issues, despite being a feminist. And I learned there are different factions, different approaches, like Laura just mentioned, Abdelrag, respectful scholars, sort of the intersections between anthropology, transnationalism, class, economics, post-colonial societies, and sort of the old colonial powers. Everything really we talk about here in Elliott, in DC, I feel like more or less you can find connections in gender. You can find connections with gender-focused issues. And you cannot simply just ignore those facts and trying to make decisions and say we're going to bring a change to all the issues we're so desperately want to address going forward. So for the memo, going back to for my memo, I wrote about the gender-based violence in Somalia. That was my the research for my research seminar class I did last semester, and it was really shocking to found how women of Somalia has been suffered, from the prolonged conflicts and as a byproduct, gender-based violence. So from the United Nations definition of the gender-based violence, it's the forms of violence that cause physical, sexual, or mental harms, suffering targets women. So this could take in forms of domestic violence, sexual violence, and also in Somalia or Burkina Faso, certain regions in the world, not just excluded to Africa. There could be also other practices such as female genital mutilation and sex trafficking. So actually in 2016 alone, there are studies being compared as the global military spending was 1.8 trillion, but in compared to the global cost to combat GBV was $1.5 trillion, and is still rising in the coming years. So really, it's issue areas that requires far more attention than we expected, yet often being sidelined or excluded in a lot of levels of peace talks or security policy issue discussions. Even right now, currently, with all the ongoing conflicts globally, still the lack of gender talks or implementation of gender-oriented policy is shocking. And the more research I did as a woman, as a person, even just to see the sort of discrimination or this horrific actions happen to everyday people based on their gender, it's heart-wrenching. So when I saw, now for all my policy or security issues, automatically somehow my brain just wired to, dive into the gender, dive into, to see what are the population being affected, how the women, how the children's, how the other LGBTQ people, the non-binary people, what's their situation, what's their place, because that's when they're being left out. And that's why sort of in my policy memo, I mentioned, I feel like it's really for us as Elliott Schools of International Affairs, where we have so many wonderful institutions to keep up with all those global trends and dear issues globally every day. We really need to take up actions and within our capacity to not bring just more awareness, but also to educate our students and our community members on ongoing issues. And in that way, we will be able to help GBV victims and by bring more researchers and bridge the gap between practice and reality in order to, hopefully bring some changes going forward. So one of the things really I feel like in the heart of all this, and probably it's, what we can do as everyone, individual, as every scholars, no matter what your background is really to cooperate the gender lens or to have this sort of mindset into the way you look at any issues, because regardless of the issue areas we're looking at, there has to be, sort of people from different population, different ethnic groups, different genders. And I just want to thank Laura so much, because also I'm a minor in anthropology, and this semester I took a course in sociocultural, sort of the intersection within anthropology. It really talks about how the intersectionality and how important that is for individuals in different situations based on their different identities, no matter gender, political, ethnicity. And that really shed a light on, how complex the issue is around gender or gender-based violence. So I really do think, it's in the heart of all the issues we talked about, or we're going to talk about going forward. It's to adopt this gender lens, to have more empathy, to have some humanitarian aspects, to shed a light on the very basic level. Not just look at grand strategy, not just look at very cold policies, but also look at the individuals, look at the realities of the people's being impacted, and be mindful, be considerate, be humane. I understand it's a very sort of ideal or sort of naive, if some may say, in this situation, but I do think there's values in talks like this. There are values to put focus on all the individuals, on everyone being impacted, and through this way we will be able to empower and bring changes. Like in the first place, like scholars like me, or ongoing, in growth scholars like me, to put more focus on gender issue, on gender-based violence in security talks. So one of the policy I recommend actually is to sponsor or host more scholars from, those backgrounds, whether they have research experience in gender issue, gender-based violences, in conflicts, in peace building, conflict prevention, or them personally being, their life being impacted by those events. Because I do think it's their values to hear from the firsthand experiences. And as I know, for Elliott has a good tradition to host scholars around the globe with a different background, and they could be able to bring expertise of their own, each unique interpretation, and contributing into the greater conversation. And also, there's another second point I want to highlight in my policy recommendation is that I do wish to see more classes or curriculum we've been setting up to focus on gender issue or the gender intersectionality with security policies. Because you can, going back to my previous point, you cannot ignore, the fact all the people being impacted by the ongoing conflicts. A lot of them, they are the victims or survivors of gender-based violences. And we need to bring more attention to educate and further research in GBV around the world. So this will, promote the policy awareness and empathies in policy making process, and also, hearing from our wonderful faculty members like Professor Graham, with all the sort of really good experiences in what it's like to talk about this complex issue in our current political atmosphere, what it's like to talk about in regional flashpoints, what it's like to talk about or bring up gender issues in high-level talks. I think this gonna provide really valuable experiences to our students, our scholars, as well as all the community members, and really shed a light and have more attentions, restructuring the way we approach security issues, as well as the way to going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jiner. I think you bring up a very, very good point when it comes to some of the things that are lacking currently in our curriculum, and some really great ideas and ways to sort of fill those gaps. So I have some questions for the panelists that I would like to ask, but before I do, I actually want to see if there are any questions from the audience members. If anybody has a question, feel free to raise your hand or to put it in the chat, and I will be happy to ask that question. Let me give everyone a few minutes on that. And if there are no questions, then I will go ahead and ask my question. I just want to be sure I'm not monopolizing the question and answer round. Okay, well, while everyone else is working on their questions, there's one thing that I think all of these different memos sort of speak to and highlight and raise, which is this idea that, in order to be more inclusive, especially when it comes to our curriculum and when it comes to teaching certain topics, oftentimes, we have sort of this, as it was put, ethnocentric approach, where American scholars tend to highlight and even dominate the conversation, when it might even be much more, illustrative if we invite people who have actually lived through these experiences or who offer their own sort of native perspectives. And it reminds me of our Shapiro prof this year, who was invited as a former Afghan refugee to come to the Elliott School and to essentially offer her expertise on, her experiences in Afghanistan. And in a recent panel that she was invited to speak on during International Women's Day, she brought up the point that, oftentimes we, in our foreign policy, we have, almost exactly as Laura described it, do Muslim women need to be saved? The same approach, was sort of taken with Afghan women, as opposed to really going to Afghan women and saying, okay, what is it that you are already doing that we can help to buttress and that we can help to empower, and really inviting them into the conversation. And so it's I find that each one of these policy memos really echoes that, right? If we are writing from an international affairs perspective, but we're not including scholarship from native languages, where we are excluding, virtually the entire non-English, scholarship that's out there. If we are thinking about peace and thinking about conflict resolution, but we're not including a feature on gender and security, exactly as Jiner has described it, we're excluding 50% of the population. As Laura sort of indicated, IR and IA tends to be very sort of macro level focused, right? We tend to consider states and state actions and how they approach each other in war and peace and things of this sort. But we do a very poor job, I think, of sort of going inter-country level, where we're taking apart institutions, bureaucracies, philosophies, public opinion, political culture, and in that also sort of the individual level anthropological experiences. So yeah, I really like how all three of these memos sort of speak to inclusion in this way as really inviting people who have been omitted, from these conversations and from this scholarship to really participate. Let's see. I'm thinking about those are things that sort of came to mind, and I wonder if, and it wasn't framed as a question, so I apologize. But if there's any immediate reactions or thoughts to some of those things that the panelists want to comment on, I'd like to give you space to do that.
Yeah, I could go. Oh, sorry. And do you want? Okay. Yeah, I feel it's, Leah and all the fellow panelists, I feel like everyone just raised this issue. It's true, in IR world, everything's very macro. We talk about region to region, state to state, party to parties. And if you talk about those, you can't really, there's a process, I believe it's really desensitizing, what on the stake we're talking about. If every day we talk about, a country as a whole entity, we kind of, get rid of all the little complexity, the nuances, the sort of ambiguous areas, and, not everything is black and white, everything is gray, everything is, colorful, and we cannot just, when we take and choose in policy makings, I personally, I think it's not right to just simply disregard, all those nuances, because that's where the conversation happens. That's when ideas got to be, bounce around, and that's where we kind of like be able to have the space, to have the floor, to talk about some of the urgent issue we wanted to talk about. But just, I don't know, it's, the reality is we, on the higher level or even on the research level, I don't think we see a lot of sort of the recognitions, or we don't really give credits to those undefined areas, because it's really undefined, it's really ambiguous. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of people to chime in, it takes research, more research, always research to be done to have a better understanding. So that's frankly how I open, that's how I use in my introduction in all my research papers. I always say there's always more research to be done. There are always more space need to be allowed and need to be provided. And I think really as institution, as Elliott, we, as an international student from China, and this is my third year here, I do feel there is a space being allowed, with people coming from different background, with different upbringing, different cultures, we got to sort of, bounce around. We might disagree with each other, but there's a great sense of sort of the respects and, a great sense of we trying to understand each other. I feel like that's the sort of the reassurance I have, I guess, going in the field, I do hope, I do have a positive look if we do keep this this sort of like a line we draw, like, oh, like we do want better futures for everyone. We do want to make something, we do want to make progress. I think that's something we could count on, I guess. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jiner. Anthony, you wanted to chime in too.
Yes, I just had a brief comment. I was thinking about what you were saying about how, asking people who are living through the conflict, what they need and how to amplify their voices. It reminded me of this concept that I'm learning in class right now. I'm taking this class called Ethics of Foreign Aid with Lucia Raffinelli. And something that we're learning about is, second best and first best actors when, NGOs go abroad and intervene in other countries' issues. And it's not to say like these NGOs aren't making a huge contribution, helping out a lot of people, but there's often first best actors who are the local people and local actors who know the issues and know the solutions well, but might not have the capacity to implement these solutions. And so it's about listening to their needs and their voices and their perspectives on what can be done in these issues. And that's something that's been really interesting to me and something that I'm thinking about as I try to navigate, higher education, but also, post-grad plans and stuff like that. And I think that's a really important idea that connects to what you were saying.
Thank you so much. So I realized that I never really introduced myself to you all. And so I'm Dr. Laila Sorurbakhsh. I teach at the Elliott School at the graduate level. I'm an assistant professor of international affairs, and I also am the associate director for one of our master's programs called the Master of International Policy and Practice program. Now that program is aimed towards mid-career level professionals who are coming back to school. And so they have bachelor's degrees and they have at least 7 years of experience. And one thing that we have been talking about in our core classes, and one thing that we're sort of teaching in our core classes, is to take a very inclusive and collaborative approach to policymaking. And so we actually frame our entire curriculum around this concept of collaborative leadership, which I think speaks to exactly the issues that you all have raised. And especially, I was reminded by this idea of the first best actors versus the second best, because the truth is a lot of our foreign policy is based on our own experiences, right? What has worked in our own personal context, what we have sort of seen as working or not working, and almost trying to extrapolate those lessons into other contexts. But the truth is, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to have sort of those local level actors really being able to chime in. And so when we think about traditional leadership in this way, and it could be a way to help combat some of the issues and the biases that you all have raised. But when we think about traditional leadership, we tend to think of it as very hierarchical, very top down, one person kind of calling the shots and then everybody sort of, following suit. But the idea of collaborative leadership is really trying to take people at all levels, and particularly those at the grassroots level, to try to engage them in not just the process and the implementation, but also in the idea phase and also in the agenda setting phase. Because exactly as you all have described it, they know the best, right? They've lived it, they're living it every day. And they also, have sort of their ear to the ground when it comes to what's going to resonate either culturally or, in terms of real action and real behavior. So it's a really, really important feature. So I have a question, a follow-up question to all of these ideas that we've been discussing here. So one of the things that I would like to do, in addition to sharing these wonderful policy memos with the other program directors, both the undergraduate level and at the graduate level, I'd like to also offer some things that they could immediately take effect into their curriculum or curricula, I should say, in the coming years. So my question is, if you could propose a class to be taught at the Elliott School, either at the undergraduate or the graduate level, what would that class be titled? It's a tough question. I'll give you a minute to think. I'll answer my own question while you all are thinking. One thing, as Jiner was sort of discussing, gender-focused issues, one thing that occurred to me is I had a student who was very interested in gender-based studies. And she took a class that we offer at the graduate level called Gender and Development. And she really liked that class. She was also in Professor Graham's, classes, etc. But one class that we didn't offer that she ended up taking over at Georgetown was Gender and Security. And, at first when she came to me and, she said, I'd like to take this class at Georgetown. I was like, oh, well, we have gender and development. And she corrected me. She said, it's not gender and development, it's gender and security. I didn't realize that we were sort of lacking that course. But it occurs to me that that would be a really, really good course to offer here. Anybody have any ideas right off the bat of a course that you think might be offered?
I can go first. Laura, do you want to go first?
Sure. Because in my policy memo, I had thought about just potential courses in the subfield of like IA. So like anthropology of foreign aid, anthropology of humanitarian intervention. But when you brought up gender and security, it made me realize that yes, there is definitely a need to have courses that are specific to a certain issue and then a sector of IA. But I think when considering the fact that I definitely think that anthropology needs to be integrated in the Elliott School, I think my course would be titled like Anthropology of International Affairs. And it would kind of be structured the same way as our Intro to IA courses. But our Intro to IA courses, I remember there was a section for economic development and like international economics, which was kind of strange to me since we already have to take economics and international economics as well as part of the core curriculum. So I think taking that out and having a section that really focuses on some of the topics that I discussed with political anthropology, and having, because one of the things that I was going to say to your comment was I took comparative politics of in Africa last semester, and Moses Kansenga, who was in the call earlier, he was actually a guest lecturer. I'm not sure if he teaches at the Elliott School or GW, but he was a guest lecturer, and it was amazing to have him because we actually were reading some of his works. And one of the things that I asked the professor is that, if she could, I don't know if she knew them personally, but the people that whose readings and writings we were reading, if we could actually speak to them too and hear their experiences. And it's kind of like you said about our Shapiro scholar, there's one thing to just, read someone's, research. And there's another thing to really pick their brain and get the why did they do this research. And I think that's really where we get to the crux of the issue with IA, is that there's kind of like this huge gap of, we're very removed from the scholars that we're reading and that we're learning from. And I think, that's kind of an issue. We should really get to know them more personally. And so I think like an Anthropology of International Affairs course that really focuses on integrating different scholars into the course and having guest lecturers talk about their experience doing field work would be, yeah, that would be my ideal course.
Thanks so much, Laura. I think that's a really great idea. I am taking notes as you all are speaking. Let's see, Jiner, did you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Laura, for amazing point. I totally support, and I think that's should be happening immediately. It could, because I would love to take that course. And one thing I guess like I just want to bring up really quick with, since like my policy memo was focused on gender, and I do feel like right now with the part of inclusiveness to, you know, contributing to more people getting involved into the security talks or any IAR talk, is to, you know, trying to shift the way the sort of the formatting or the weird or the people's sort of impression of gender classes. You know, it's not just for women, it's not just for female, it's not just for minorities or LGBTQ people, because one of the things I realized after taking a lot of gender classes here in GW, it's, you know, for even for anthropology or the gender security class I took with Professor Fahana Kazi, I think, I don't know if she's still with Elliott anymore, but most of the class, I would say 99% are female students, which is wonderful. You know, we see all those young girls and females scholars being empowered and bring amazing contribution and do research on a lot of issues. But at the same time, I do think there's, you know, there's another side of, you know, when I talk about excluding the 50%, you know, we should bring rebranding how we approach to gender issues. It's not just women issue. It's not just minorities issue. It's everyone. It impacts everyone. Even if you are not being impacted directly, I do think, you know, if you didn't do anything within your capacity, you are one of the people to sustain, you know, this ideal of gender imbalances or gender related to conflicts. So if I could propose a class, I would, you know, try not necessarily making gender entirely separate from the current IA, but however, it is, you know, really trying to normalize, just like any other theories we talk about, any other lenses we talk about in IA, like realism, like those sort of economics lenses, you know, it would be great just to little by little and add little touches on the issues, all the issues we talk about. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much, Jiner. And I see that we've come almost up on the hour. So Anthony, I don't know if you would like to, if you have an idea of a course that you would like to propose before we sort of end the great discussion that we've had here today.
No, I don't think I can top what Laura and Jiner had proposed. I do agree that these ideas are really interesting, and you know, the Shapiro professor, I was actually in her class for a few weeks before I had to drop due to scheduling issues. But you know, I think having professors and faculty members or guest speakers who are embedded in these issues that we're trying to learn about is really important. I know I've been having a lot more guest speakers this semester compared to when we were in COVID times, but hearing from these diverse perspectives and inputs it's really changed my perspective, and a lot of their messaging and comments has stuck with me. So I would second that, or third.
Excellent. Well, let me just take this time to thank you all for your wonderful policy memos. I'm so excited to be able to share your great work with the other program directors, both at the undergraduate and at the graduate level. And I will be sure to highlight some of these issues that you all have raised and these great solutions, which I think is, you know, the key part, right? It's not just about raising the issues, it's also offering, you know, really tangible and realistic solutions. So, hopefully we can implement some of these ideas, and you all have made the Elliott School a better place just by virtue of the fact of, your contributions today. So thank you all again. Congratulations on winning this competition. We hope to be hosting this competition every year. So please, tell your friends, tell everyone at the Elliott School about these types of competitions. The more, student voices that we can include in some of these considerations, I think it's the better. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you very much. It was great to meet everyone.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I want to thank everyone who came, and all the panelists and moderator and Elliott School. I'm beyond thrilled, and I'm looking forward to learn more about all the issues we just talked about. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone. Thank you.